The crack of dawn split the sky like a warning, the kind of cold that bites your knuckles and makes your breath hang in the air. I stood at the edge of the forest, rifle slung over my shoulder, feeling the weight of more than just the gun. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a collision of worlds, and I didn't even know it yet. Elliot Pierce, that's me, 24, a city kid from Portland who'd never held a rifle until a month ago. I'd moved to this small Oregon town, Nestucca, chasing a fresh start after a breakup that left me hollow. My new neighbor, Caleb, was the kind of guy who could make anyone feel alive again. Golden retriever energy packed into a 6-foot frame, with a grin that could thaw a winter storm. He'd invited me on this hunting trip, said it'd be good for me to get out of my head. His dad, James, was coming too, a man whose silence carried the weight of a judge's gavel. The forest loomed ahead, a tangle of pines and fog that seemed to swallow sound itself. Caleb clapped a hand on my shoulder, his touch lingering just a second too long. "You ready, city boy?" he teased, his hazel eyes catching the dawn light. I smirked, trying to hide the way my pulse jumped. "Born ready," I lied, adjusting the rifle. Truth was, I was out of my depth. City streets didn't prepare you for this. But Caleb's laugh, warm and reckless, made me want to try. James led the way, his boots crunching the frost-covered ground with purpose. He hadn't said much since we'd piled into his old pickup at 4 a.m., just gruff instructions about safety and tracking. His presence was a wall, solid and unyielding, and I couldn't shake the feeling he was watching me, not as a hunter, but as something else. We trekked deeper, the air growing colder, the forest closing in. Caleb stayed close, pointing out deer tracks, his voice low and conspiratorial. "See that? Fresh. We're close." His excitement was infectious, but every time our eyes met, there was something unspoken, a spark that made my chest tighten. I'd felt it for weeks, ever since he'd helped me move a couch into my apartment, our hands brushing as we laughed over nothing. "Focus, boys," James barked, his voice cutting through the moment. He stopped, kneeling to inspect a broken twig. "Deer's been through here. Stay sharp." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Caleb's shoulder bumped mine as we walked, and I wondered if he felt it too. This pull, this thing we hadn't named. I wasn't out to him, not yet. Growing up, I'd learned to keep that part of me locked away, especially in places like this, where small-town eyes could cut deeper than any knife. An hour in, we spotted it. A buck, massive, its antlers like a crown against the mist. James raised a hand, signaling us to stop. "Elliot," he said, his voice low, "you take the shot." My stomach dropped. I'd practiced, sure, but this was real, a living thing, not a target. Caleb gave me an encouraging nod, his hand brushing my arm. "You got this," he whispered. I raised the rifle, my hands unsteady. The buck's eyes met mine, calm and unyielding, and for a moment, I saw myself, vulnerable, exposed. I lowered the gun. "I can't," I muttered, shame creeping up my neck. James's jaw tightened, but Caleb just shrugged. "No big deal. Plenty of chances." His voice was soft, but his dad's silence was deafening. We moved on, the tension thickening like the fog. By noon, we'd set up a small camp to rest. Caleb and I sat on a fallen log, sharing a thermos of coffee, our knees almost touching. James stood apart, cleaning his rifle with a focus that felt like avoidance. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I asked Caleb, keeping my voice low. He leaned back, staring at the canopy. "Sometimes. But this is home. Dad's got his ways, you know. Hard to break free." His eyes flicked to mine, and there it was again, that spark, like a match struck in the dark. Before I could respond, James called us over. "Tracks again. Let's move." His tone was clipped, his eyes lingering on me. I felt like prey. The afternoon dragged, the forest growing denser, the air heavier. Caleb and I fell into step, our conversation easy despite the weight of James's presence. He told me about growing up here, about his mom who'd left when he was a kid, about the pressure to be the son his dad wanted. I told him about Portland, about the ex who'd shattered me, though I skipped the part about him being a guy. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, James stopped abruptly. "Elliot," he said, his voice different now, quieter, almost dangerous. "You and me need to talk. Alone." Caleb frowned, stepping closer. "Dad, what's—" "Stay here," James snapped, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart thudded as he gestured toward a thicket. "Walk with me." I glanced at Caleb, who looked as confused as I felt. "Go," he said softly, but his eyes were worried. James led me deeper into the woods, away from Caleb, away from safety. The trees seemed to close in, their branches clawing at the sky. My pulse raced, every instinct screaming to run. He stopped in a small clearing, turning to face me. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes burned. "I see the way you look at my son," he said, each word sharp as a blade. "And I know what you are." My breath caught, the world tilting. I opened my mouth to deny it, to lie, but James raised a hand. "Don't. I've known since you got here. And I need you to hear me out. Because there's something you don't know about Caleb. Something he's too scared to tell you." The forest held its breath, and so did I. James's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it, but I kept my face steady, years of hiding who I was kicking in like muscle memory. The clearing felt smaller now, the trees pressing in as if they were listening. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted. James didn't move, his eyes boring into mine. "Caleb's not like you think. He's got his own battles, ones he doesn't talk about. Not with me, not with anyone." He paused, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. "But I see it. I've always seen it." I wanted to bolt, to find Caleb and pretend this conversation never happened, but my feet stayed rooted. "You're not making sense," I said, though a part of me dreaded where this was going. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "He's like you, Elliot. He's been hiding it his whole life. And I've let him, because I thought it'd keep him safe. But you showing up, it's changing things." The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. "Caleb? Like me?" My mind raced back to every glance, every touch, every moment that felt like more than friendship. Was James right, or was this some kind of trap? I'd heard stories of men like him, small-town fathers who'd rather break bones than face the truth about their kids. "I don't know what you think you see," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "But Caleb's your son. Why are you telling me this?" James's face softened, just for a second, and I saw something I hadn't expected: pain. "Because he's drowning, Elliot. He's been drowning for years, and I don't know how to pull him out. But you might." Before I could respond, a twig snapped behind us. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, his face pale, his eyes wide with something between fear and anger. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" James turned, his shoulders stiffening. "This doesn't concern you, Caleb." "Like hell it doesn't." Caleb's voice cracked, raw and desperate. He looked at me, his gaze pleading. "Elliot, let's go. Now." I hesitated, caught between James's cryptic words and Caleb's panic. But the way Caleb's hands shook, the way his eyes darted like a trapped animal, it was enough. I stepped toward him, my rifle suddenly feeling heavier than ever. "Caleb," James started, but Caleb cut him off. "No, you don't get to do this. Not like this." His voice trembled, but there was steel in it. He grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the path. "We're done here." We walked in silence, the forest swallowing James's presence behind us. My mind was a storm. James's words, Caleb's reaction, the truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I wanted to ask Caleb what he was hiding, what his father meant, but his grip on my arm was tight, his jaw set like he was holding back a scream. When we reached the camp, Caleb let go, his hands falling to his sides. He wouldn't look at me. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "He shouldn't have pulled you into this." "Into what?" I pressed, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the ground. It's nothing. Just let it go, okay? But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it, the weight of whatever he was carrying, the same weight I'd carried for years. I wanted to reach out, to tell him he didn't have to hide, not from me. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by fear and years of self-preservation. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. We didn't hunt anymore, just packed up and headed back to the truck. James caught up with us eventually, silent and unreadable. The drive home was suffocating, the three of us crammed into the cab, the air thick with things unsaid. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my apartment's tiny balcony, staring at the stars over Nestuka, replaying James's words. He's like you. Was it true? And if it was, why did Caleb keep it locked away? I thought of my own years of hiding, the lies I'd told to fit in, the pieces of myself I'd buried. I didn't want that for him. The next morning, Caleb showed up at my door, his face drawn, his eyes red like he hadn't slept either. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. My apartment was small, cluttered with unpacked boxes, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the forest. Caleb sat on the couch, his hands clasped tight, like he was bracing for a fight. "My dad," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "He's not wrong. Not entirely." My heart skipped. What's that mean? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it. The fear, the longing, the truth he'd been running from. "I've known for a long time," he said, his voice breaking. "But this town, my dad, it's not easy. I thought if I just kept my head down, it'd be okay. But then you showed up," and he trailed off, his eyes searching mine. "And what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin. "You make me want to stop hiding." The world stopped. My heart was a drum, loud and unsteady, and before I could think, I reached for his hand. His fingers curled around mine, tentative at first, then firm, like he was holding on for dear life. "Caleb," I whispered, but he shook his head. "Don't say anything. Not yet." He closed his eyes, his grip tightening. "Just stay." And so we sat there, hands entwined, the weight of the truth settling between us. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was a start, a crack in the walls we'd both built. The days after Caleb's confession, or half-confession, felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance, every word carried new weight, like we were both waiting for the other to fall. I wanted to push, to ask him to say it outright, but I knew what it was like to stand on that edge, terrified of the drop. Nestuka wasn't the kind of place that made things easy. It was a town of pickup trucks and church suppers, where different was a word whispered like a curse. I'd seen the looks at the gas station, the way folks sized me up, the new guy with no roots. Caleb had lived here his whole life, under his father's shadow and the town's watchful eyes. I couldn't imagine the courage it took to even hint at who he was. We started spending more time together, away from James, away from the forest. Mornings at the diner, evenings fixing up my apartment, late nights on my balcony sharing beers and stories. Each moment felt like a step closer to something real, something neither of us could ignore. One night, as the stars burned bright above us, Caleb told me about his mom. "She left when I was 10, he said, his voice low. "Dad never got over it. Thinks it's his job to keep me from breaking, like she did." He took a long sip of his beer, his eyes distant. "He doesn't get that I'm already broken, just in a different way." I wanted to tell him he wasn't broken, that he was more whole than anyone I'd ever met, but I just listened. Sometimes that's all you can do, hold space for someone else's pain. The next day, James showed up at my door. No warning, just him standing there, his flannel jacket stained with motor oil, his face unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. I braced myself, the memory of the forest still sharp. "About what?" "About Caleb," he said, his voice gruff but softer than before. And about you. I crossed my arms, my guard up. You've said enough about me. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I was wrong to come at you like that. I was trying to protect him, but I see it now. You're good for him. He's different since you got here. Lighter. I blinked, caught off guard. Then why are you here? Because it's not just about you two. He leaned against the wall, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. This town, it's not kind to people like you. Like him. I've seen what happens when folks don't fit the mold. I don't want that for my son. Then let him be himself, I said, my voice sharper than I meant. He's suffocating, James. You know that. He flinched, like I'd hit a nerve. I'm trying, he said quietly. But it's not easy. Not when I've spent his whole life trying to keep him safe. I softened, seeing the crack in his armor. Safe isn't the same as free. He nodded, slow and deliberate, then turned to leave. Just take care of him, Elliot. Please. The door closed behind him, and I stood there, stunned. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it was something, a step toward understanding. That night, Caleb came over, his mood lighter than it had been in days. We cooked dinner together, a clumsy attempt at pasta that ended with sauce on the counter and laughter in the air. As we ate, our knees touching under the table, I felt it, the shift. The walls were coming down, brick by brick. Elliot, he said, setting down his fork. There's something I need to tell you. My heart raced, but I nodded. I'm listening. He took a deep breath, his eyes locked on mine. I'm gay. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. I've known since I was a kid, but I never said it out loud. Not until now. I reached for his hand, my own trembling. I'm proud of you, I said, my voice thick. And I'm gay too. His eyes widened, then softened, a smile breaking through. I had a feeling, he said, his voice teasing but warm. We laughed, the tension breaking like a dam. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like we could be something more than a secret. But the next morning, everything changed. I woke to a text from Caleb. Meet me at the diner. Urgent. When I got there, he was in a booth, his face pale, his hands wrapped tight around a coffee mug. Someone saw us, he said, his voice low. Last night, on your balcony. They're talking. My stomach dropped. Who? Doesn't matter, he said, his eyes darting to the window. This town, it's already started. The whispers, the looks. My dad heard it at the hardware store this morning. I leaned forward, my voice firm. We don't have to hide, Caleb. Not anymore. He shook his head, his jaw tight. You don't get it, Elliot. This isn't Portland. People here, they don't just talk. They act. I wanted to argue, to tell him we could face it together, but the fear in his eyes stopped me. For the first time, I realized how high the stakes were, not just for us, but for everything he'd ever known. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on Caleb's face. He hadn't touched his coffee, just stared into it like it held answers. I wanted to reach across the table, to anchor him, but the fear in his eyes kept my hands still. What do you mean, they act? I asked, keeping my voice low. Caleb's gaze flicked to the door, where a group of locals laughed too loudly over pancakes. Last year, a guy named Riley worked at the sawmill. Came out to a few friends. Word got around, and suddenly his truck's tires were slashed, his locker trashed. He left town by spring. His voice was flat, but his knuckles were white. That's what happens here. My chest tightened. I'd faced my share of hate in Portland. Sneers, slurs, the occasional shove. But this felt different, heavier. We're not Riley, I said. We can handle this. He looked at me, his eyes searching. Can we? Because I'm not sure I can. Before I could respond, the diner door swung open, and James walked in. His face was a storm cloud, his boots heavy against the linoleum. He slid into the booth beside Caleb, his presence filling the space like a warning. I heard, he said, his voice gruff. About you two. Caleb stiffened, his hands retreating to his lap. Dad, don't. James cut him off, but his tone wasn't angry, just tired. I don't care who you love, Caleb. But this town does. And they're not going to make it easy. I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Then we fight. Together. James's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw respect. But then he shook his head. You're brave, Elliot. But bravery doesn't stop a fist. Or worse. The weight of his words settled over us, heavy as the fog in the forest. Caleb was silent, his eyes fixed on the table. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to tell him we could face anything as long as we had each other. But doubt crept in. What if he wasn't ready? What if I was asking too much? That night, I convinced Caleb to come to my place. We sat on the balcony again, but the stars felt colder now, distant. What do you want to do? I asked, my voice soft. He leaned back, his hands behind his head. I don't know. Part of me wants to run, leave this place, start over somewhere new. But this is home. My dad, my friends, I can't just walk away. You don't have to, I said. We can stay. We can be us, right here. He turned to me, his eyes bright with something new. Hope, maybe, or defiance. You really believe that? I do, I said, and I meant it. I'd spent too long hiding to go back now. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. Okay, he whispered. Let's try. The next few days were a blur of whispers and stares. At the grocery store, eyes followed us. At the bar, conversations hushed when we walked in. But Caleb held his head high, his hand brushing mine in quiet moments, and I felt a fire growing in me, a determination to protect this, to protect him. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, the town buzzing with the usual end-of-week energy. Caleb and I were at the local bar, playing pool, trying to act normal despite the weight of eyes on us. A group of guys in the corner kept glancing our way, their laughs too sharp, their beers emptying too fast. Ignore them, Caleb muttered, lining up a shot. But I couldn't. One of them, a broad-shouldered guy with a buzz cut, stood and walked over. You two look cozy, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Caleb's cue froze midair. Back off, Travis, he said, his tone low but firm. Travis smirked, leaning closer. What's the matter, Caleb? City boy got you forgetting who you are. I stepped forward, my fists clenched. Walk away. The bar went quiet, every eye on us. Travis laughed, but there was no humor in it. Or what? Before I could answer, Caleb grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door. Let's go. Outside. The night air was sharp, but it couldn't cool the anger burning in me. Why didn't you let me handle that? I snapped. Because it's not worth it, Caleb said, his voice tight. You don't know these guys, Elliot. They don't stop at words. I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He was scared, not just for himself, but for me. We walked home in silence, the town feeling smaller, more suffocating. When we reached my apartment, Caleb stopped at the door. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want this for you. I cupped his face, my thumbs brushing his cheeks. I want this, I said. I want you. His eyes searched mine, and then he kissed me, hard, desperate, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. I kissed him back, pouring everything I had into it, hoping it was enough. But deep down, I knew the fight was just beginning. The kiss lingered in my mind for days, a spark that refused to fade. But so did the memory of Travis's sneer, the weight of the town's eyes. Caleb and I were walking a tightrope now, and every step felt like it could send us crashing. We tried to keep things normal, coffee at the diner, evenings fixing up my apartment, but the town wouldn't let us. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors to open hostility. A note on my truck's windshield, leave. A brick through Caleb's garage window. Each act was a warning, and I could see it wearing on him, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his smile flickered. One night, we sat in my living room, the TV on low, neither of us really watching. Maybe we should leave, Caleb said, his voice barely audible. Go somewhere bigger, somewhere we can just be. I turned to him, my heart aching. Is that what you want? He didn't answer right away, just stared at the floor. I want you, he said finally. but I don't know if I can keep you safe here. The words hit harder than any brick. I'd come to Nestuka to start over, but now it felt like I was dragging Caleb into a fight he hadn't chosen. We're stronger than this, I said, taking his hand. We can face them. He squeezed my hand, but his eyes were distant. I hope you're right. The next day, James called us to his house. We sat at his kitchen table, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and old wood. He looked older, his face etched with worry. I've been talking to some folks, he said, trying to calm things down. But it's not good, boys. Caleb's jaw tightened. What did you hear? James sighed, rubbing his temples. Travis and his crew, they're planning something. I don't know what, but it's not just talk anymore. My stomach twisted. We can handle Travis, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. James shook his head. It's not just him. It's the town. People are scared of what they don't understand, and they're taking it out on you. Caleb stood, his chair scraping the floor. So what? We just run? Let them win. James's eyes softened. I don't want you to run. I want you to live. The words hung there, heavy and true. I looked at Caleb, saw the fight in him, the same fight I felt. But I also saw the fear, the weight of a lifetime in a town that didn't want him as he was. That night, we made a plan. Not to run, but to stand our ground. We'd talk to the sheriff, get ahead of whatever Travis was planning. We'd show Nestuka we weren't going anywhere. But plans have a way of falling apart. It happened on a Saturday, the town square packed for the annual Harvest Festival. Caleb and I went together, holding hands despite the stares. It felt like defiance, like a declaration. For a moment, I thought we'd won. People smiled, some even waved. But then Travis and his friends appeared, their faces hard, their steps purposeful. Caleb, Travis called, his voice cutting through the crowd. You think you can just parade this around? Caleb's grip on my hand tightened. Go home, Travis, he said, his voice steady but laced with warning. The crowd parted, eyes on us, the air electric with tension. Travis stepped closer, his friends fanning out behind him. This town's got standards, he spat. And you're not meeting them. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. Back off, I said, my voice low. Travis laughed, but before he could say more, James pushed through the crowd. That's enough, he growled, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd had enough. You don't get to decide who belongs here. The crowd murmured, some nodding, some glaring. Travis hesitated, his bravado faltering under James's stare. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then Travis lunged. It happened so fast, a fist aimed at Caleb, my own body moving before I could think. I shoved Caleb out of the way, taking the hit to my shoulder. Pain exploded, but I stayed on my feet, adrenaline surging. The crowd erupted, some shouting, some pulling Travis back. James grabbed him by the collar, his face a mask of fury. You touch my son again, and you'll regret it, he said, his voice deadly calm. Travis's friends dragged him away, the crowd dispersing, but the damage was done. Caleb's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. I reached for him, but he pulled away, his breath ragged. I can't do this, he whispered, and before I could stop him, he walked away, disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep that night. Caleb's absence was a hole in my chest, his words echoing in my head. I can't do this. I wanted to chase him, to demand he stay, but I knew he needed space. So I waited, pacing my apartment, the stars outside mocking me with their indifference. By morning, I couldn't wait anymore. I drove to Caleb's place, a small house on the edge of town, its paint peeling like old memories. He was on the porch, staring at nothing, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He didn't smoke, never had, as far as I knew. Caleb, I said, stepping out of my truck. He didn't look up. You shouldn't be here, Elliot. I climbed the steps, sitting beside him. I'm not going anywhere. He exhaled, the smoke curling into the morning air. You saw what happened. It's only going to get worse. Then we face it, I said, my voice firm. Together. He shook his head, his eyes red. You don't get it. This isn't just about Travis. It's this place, this life. I thought I could be strong, but I'm not. I took the cigarette from his hand, crushing it under my boot. You're stronger than you think. You told me who you are. That's not nothing. He looked at me then, his eyes raw. What if it's not enough? I wanted to kiss him, to pull him close and promise it would be okay, but words were all I had. It's enough for me, I said. You're enough. For a moment, he softened, his hand brushing mine. But then he pulled back, standing. I need time, Elliot. I'm sorry. I watched him walk inside, the door closing between us. My heart screamed to follow, but I drove home instead, the weight of his words crushing me. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Caleb avoided me, his truck gone from his house most hours. I threw myself into work, fixing up my apartment, anything to keep my mind off the ache. But Nestuka wouldn't let me forget. The stares continued, the whispers grew louder. I felt like I was back in the forest, alone with James's truth, only now it was worse. Caleb was slipping away. Then James showed up again. He found me at the diner, sliding into the booth across from me. He's struggling, he said without preamble. But he's not gone. I set down my coffee, my hands shaking. He won't talk to me. James leaned forward, his voice low. He's scared, Elliot. Not just of the town, but of losing you. He's never had something worth fighting for before. I swallowed hard, the words cutting deep. What do I do? Be patient, he said. But don't give up. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't force Caleb to face this, but I could show him I wasn't going anywhere. I started small, leaving notes on his porch, simple things like I'm here or you're enough. I didn't know if he read them, but I kept going, hoping one would break through. A week later, he showed up at my door. His face was tired, but his eyes were clear. I'm sorry, he said, stepping inside. I didn't know how to handle this. I pulled him into a hug, my arms tight around him. You don't have to do it alone. He clung to me, his breath shaky. I'm scared, Elliot. But I don't want to lose you. You won't, I promised, my voice fierce. We'll figure this out. The next day, we went to the sheriff. We told him about Travis, the brick, the note. He listened, his face unreadable, then promised to keep an eye out. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Caleb and I started being more open, not hiding, not shrinking. We held hands at the diner, laughed at the bar, lived like we had nothing to prove. Some people turned away, but others didn't. A few even smiled, like they'd been waiting for someone to take the first step. One evening, as we walked through the town square, Caleb stopped, his hand tight in mine. I love you, he said, his voice steady despite the crowd around us. My heart stopped, then soared. I love you too, I said, pulling him close. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. But in that moment, we were free. Freedom doesn't come cheap. Caleb and I had carved out a space for ourselves, but Nestuka wasn't done with us. The whispers didn't stop, and Travis's crew still lingered like wolves at the edge of a fire. But something had shifted, inside Caleb, inside me. We weren't running anymore. One Sunday, James invited us to his house for dinner. It was the first time we'd sat down together since the hunt, and the air was thick with unspoken history. He'd made pot roast, the kind that fills a room with warmth, and for a moment, it felt like we could be a family, not perfect, but trying. I'm proud of you, James said, his voice gruff as he passed the potatoes. Both of you. Caleb's fork paused, his eyes wide. You mean that? James nodded, his face soft in a way I hadn't seen before. I haven't been the father you needed, but I'm learning. I reached for Caleb's hand under the table, squeezing it. He squeezed back, his smile small but real. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Travis and his friends didn't come for us again, but the town's judgment lingered. Some doors closed, but others opened. The diner's owner, a gruff woman named Marla, started saving us the best booth. A few kids from the high school came out, inspired by Caleb's courage. Slowly, Nestuka started to change, not all at once, but enough to feel like hope. One night, Caleb and I drove out to the forest, the same one where it all began. We didn't bring rifles, just a blanket and a thermos of coffee. We lay under the stars, the air crisp, the world quiet except for our breathing. "I used to think I'd never be free," Caleb said, his head resting on my chest. "Not here, not anywhere." "And now?" I asked, my fingers tracing circles on his back. He looked up, his eyes catching the starlight. "Now I know I can be. Because of you." I kissed him, slow and soft, the forest bearing witness. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. We'd faced the truth, his, mine, James's, and come out stronger. The hunt had started with a rifle and a deer, but it ended with something bigger, a love worth fighting for, a life worth living. Nastuka might never fully understand, but we didn't need it to. We had each other, and that was enough. As we lay there, the stars above us felt like a promise, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light finds a way.